Okay. Hello and welcome to the second event of ESACH Talks 2022. My name is Samidha, and as part of ESACH's coordination committee, I'm going to host this event tonight. First of all, I would like to thank you all for joining with us with yet another panel discussion. Just a quick reminder, we will be recording this session to post it online. So if you don't wish to be viewed on the online platforms, then please go ahead and turn off your cameras. I would also request you to please mute yourselves and your microphones during the presentations to avoid any inconvenience. Now, moving on to our talks, we are delighted to have 4 emerging heritage professionals with us as our panelists. Each of them will be sharing their work, their experience with us, and talk about some key issues, challenges, and opportunities to fight against the illicit trafficking of cultural properties. After their presentations, we will hold a short discussion followed by a question-answer session. So feel free to use the chat to write questions as you have them, but please remember to include the name of the speaker that you are addressing. Keep an eye through the chat throughout the event so that you would be able to see the links that we share, which will give you more information. So without further delay, I would like to introduce our first panelist, Daud, who works at UNESCO as an associate expert at Secretariat of 1970 Convention. He has a background in international affairs, and for us to get a better idea about this event, he's going to introduce the theme of our talk today. So Daud, you can share your screen now.
Yep. Can you hear me? You want to continue or should I start? Okay, ça marche. Well, thank you first of all for having me invited and for giving me the opportunity to speak tonight about the 1970 Convention and the work of the Secretariat to fight illicit trafficking. So what I'm going to do tonight is to present briefly our work, the topic, and then we can move on. Does it work? Yes, introduction. So first of all, I would like to briefly introduce the topic and speak about what illicit trafficking of cultural property actually is. So it can be different things. You have pillaging, illicit excavations, thefts. So I would like to we look together at some examples. So here, for instance, you have the historical site of Apamea in Syria. Before the war started in 2011, and you see the site, and now when you look at it, you have all these dots everywhere when you look on the satellite image of the site. And all these holes are looters that have been digging for things. And you have the same in this site of Dura Europos, which is on the Euphrates, also in Syria, where you can see before and after images, where you have all these holes everywhere, and where you can see that illicit trafficking and particularly looting has been ongoing. What happens then is that you find all these objects. They are smuggled out of Syria. For instance, here we have a picture from the customs in Lebanon that shared it with the UNESCO, and where they show things that they have found, but not everything is found by the customs or by law enforcement. Unfortunately, many of these objects end up on online sales or on internet, on websites, or even in galleries. So you can see that even on website like eBay, you might find objects that probably, you cannot know for sure that this one is looted, but there's high probability that it comes from looting and illicit trafficking from Syria. So this is to give you just an introduction of how things unfold. Now, about the 1970 Convention. You can see this is an international treaty which is ratified by 141 states parties. There are still some regions in the world that are not where countries haven't ratified the convention. So this is something we try to work on. But the convention in itself is the first international legal framework that was created to fight against illicit trafficking. And what you should know about this treaty, the first thing is that it's non-enforceable, which means that states parties, once they ratify the convention, they still need to adopt appropriate legislation in their country. The second very important point, which is not only valid for the 1970 Convention, but in general it's a rule of international law, that it's non-retroactive, which means that when you ratify the convention, it only applies from the day you ratify it and not for facts that happened before. So this is this is really two things that you really need to remember on how the convention works. The convention has three different distinct pillars. It's preventive measures, restitution provisions, and international cooperation. Regarding preventive measures, you could say briefly, you have inventories, for instance, which are very important preventive measures. You have the creation of specific laws. You have the creation of export certificates, the creation of specific law enforcement units that are trained to identify cultural heritage. All these aspects are things that need to be done in order to prevent against illicit trafficking. Because the problem with illicit trafficking is that once the objects are stolen or looted, it's very hard to find them and to return them. So you need to first, the best thing you can do to fight against illicit trafficking is actually to put in place measures to better protect the heritage already in place against the possible looting. Then you have, of course, the convention also contains restitution provisions, although it's very comparatively quite weak on these provisions, because as I said earlier, it's only applicable once it enters into force, and the convention speaks about just compensation that should be given without really giving a definition of what this just compensation should look like, and it only applies for inventoried objects. This is very important. This convention only applies for inventoried objects, not for objects that have been looted and that you don't know, because they have been looted from a place that you don't know. And the third pillar of the convention is international cooperation, which is also an important aspect of it, because the convention asks state parties to put in place bilateral agreements and to work together to fight illicit trafficking. And this international cooperation is not only between states parties; it's also between national authorities. So this to really briefly give you an overview of what the convention says. What we do, the Secretariat, there are three things that we do mainly. It's capacity building, awareness raising, and technical advice. In this presentation, I would rather focus on awareness raising. I will continue and give you examples on awareness raising, but capacity building is something we do quite a lot actually around the world, where we participate in seminars and workshops for law enforcement, for national authorities, for anyone, states parties who request it, and we explain them how the convention works, how what we do, what tools we develop, what they can do in order to better fight against illicit trafficking. And the other point, technical advice, is mostly when states parties have specific questions that they ask us. For instance, if they have a new law that they want to put in place and they want to ask us something about the law, how it should be put in place, if they request any help regarding online sales or sales in auction houses. And then there's awareness raising. This is actually what we from the Secretariat, this is the part we focus most on, because capacity building is mostly done by our field offices, and we at the Secretariat, at the headquarters level, we focus on awareness raising. So I can give you some examples. For instance, this is one international campaign we developed in 2020 for the 50th anniversary of the 1970 Convention. And it actually was about framing an object that was looted, that was stolen, like this painting from the Van Eyck brothers from the Ghent Cathedral, and to give it this very beautiful background where it is in a lavish apartment, and then to give this very catchy phrase, "How much for the soul of a nation?" We have developed 5 of these images. So this is an example of a global awareness raising campaign. But awareness raising is also organizing international conferences like the one we did in September, which you can see behind on here on the screen, where we brought together international organizations, people from the private sector, art market actors, states parties, other organizations, really to discuss on the topic of fighting illicit trafficking. And then we have also these sorts of publications where we focus on successful restitutions, like this example here of the cochlear statues that were returned to Cambodia in 2017, I think, and where we tend to give examples and explain how it unfolded, what was done. In this, here it's the World Heritage magazine, but it can also be any other magazine where you can explain these sort of things. So this is to give you an idea about how our work looks like. So just for final remarks, because I would like to give the others also enough time to speak. So what are the effects of the 1970 Convention? Today, you can really say that the date of 1970 has become a benchmark for art dealers. When you look at catalogs for auction houses, you will often see that they would want to provide the provenance information up to 1970. Although it's not necessarily linked to the ratification, but 1970 has become like a day that is burned into the minds of the art dealers. Then you have the fact that state parties start to implement more and more the provisions of the convention, which is seen that we have more and more countries that ratify the convention, 141, as I said, and we are looking forward to probably 1 or 2 more this year. You can really see a sort of change of attitude of people wanting to buy cultural property and artifacts and antiquities, because they more and more want to be diligent when they buy, because it becomes more and more of a knowledge that objects that you buy might not be harmful and not harmless, that in a way that they come from an illicit context. You have the United Nations Security Council that adopts resolutions on the topic, which is mainly seen through Resolution 2347. And you have even the G20 that is now where the topic of the fight against illicit trafficking has become a topic that was debated during the G20 meeting last year in Italy in particular. And of course, you have a growing media interest. So just to give you an overview of the 1970 Convention. And yeah, I mean, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate. I can also explain things further, but I would like to give also the floor to the other speakers. So please.
Yeah, thank you so much, Daud. Thank you so much for explaining the theme of the talk, so that now the audience members have some idea, some insight into the subject. They will get the chance to ask you questions in our Q&A session. So now, moving forward, our next panelist is Romana. She is a program assistant at the Movable Heritage and Museums Unit at UNESCO. With a background in law and cultural heritage management, she is currently working on capacity development activities in the fight against illicit trafficking of cultural properties within the framework of UNESCO and EU projects. So now, Romana, you can share your screen.
So thank you very much for presenting me. So I'm Romana. I work together with Daoud at the Movable Heritage and Museum Unit. And I'm actually going to complement the presentation of Daoud by giving some examples of activities that UNESCO is implementing together with the European Union to develop capacity among different types of actors. So, as you may have understood from Daoud's presentation, the illicit trafficking of cultural property is a very complex subject, which takes into account quite many different actors and different regions. So therefore, since 2017, a series of projects have been implemented by UNESCO to develop capacity among all those different actors. So I will go more into detail of each of the projects a little bit later, but here you can see the whole sequence. So the first project that started in 2017 was focused on the art market. The project that started a year later was focused on engaging the European judiciary and law enforcement agencies. And the last project, the current project, which started in 2019, takes into account a broader geographical scope. So it's not only focused on the EU, but also the Western Balkans and the Southern Mediterranean countries, and also takes into account not only other types of actors, but tries to find ways in which they connect all together. So as I said, the first project was focused on the art market and aimed to raise awareness among public and private art market actors in the European Union member states on illicit trafficking and the need to protect cultural heritage, but also the implications of illicit trade on other types of organized crime, such as money laundering and the financing of terrorism. So the project had two components, one capacity building conference, and one a temporary e-learning platform where the different participants who were all from art market sectors could learn more about the legal framework, ways to exercise due diligence, which is a very important topic also for the art markets. So then the project that started in 2018 was aimed to raise awareness and build capacity among custom, police, and law enforcement officers. And this had three elements. Actually, it had a 3-day training workshop that brought together representatives from judicial, police, and custom officers from 31 different European countries. It was also the occasion to launch the resource that was created in the framework of this project, which I also strongly recommend you to read. It's a toolkit, which is a very handy baseline actually to learn about what illicit trafficking is, what the legal framework is, and also provides case studies and practical tools to learn more on the subject. And also for this project, there was a temporary e-learning platform specifically dedicated to these participants. And now, as I said, the current project takes into account a broader geographical scope. So EU member states, Western Balkan states, and the Southern Mediterranean countries, which are actually source countries and transit countries that are in the vicinity of the EU. And so one of the activities were the peer-to-peer exchanges. So it was a way to share experiences and practices between different regions. So Algeria was the representative of any South partner country and as a source country. Serbia was the representative of a Western Balkan and a transit country, and the Netherlands shared their experience as a EU member state and as a destination country. And this was actually a very interesting experience because the exchanges really were a good example of the interregional cooperation that the 1970 Convention helps to promote. And you can find some of the testimonies also on our website, but it is a one of the activities that we hope could be a first to then develop further with other countries. In October 2021, a capacity development workshop for the European Neighborhood South countries was organized to discuss the implementation of the UN regulations relating to the fight against illicit trafficking. So they discussed how these tools are implemented and the difficulties that they have. And so, as I said in the beginning of my presentation, the current project also takes into account new or other types of actors, which are also museum and cultural heritage professionals, for which a workshop was organized in partnership with ICOM. And the workshop aimed to raise awareness on the mechanisms to fight illicit trafficking of cultural property among museums, such as the importance of due diligence and provenance research. And it was a good occasion to connect different institutions together and to strengthen the international network of museums. And then, as you may have heard also maybe on several occasions, that the illicit trafficking of cultural property also has strong implications on the financial sectors, because it holds links with money laundering and terrorism financing. So as sort of gatekeepers of the financial systems, banks are also quite important actors with whom we tend to collaborate more. So this is why in January this year, a workshop was organized to bring together experts, researchers, but also private and public banking institutions such as the European Central Bank, the European Bank of Reconstruction and Development, the Banking Federation, but also Deloitte and UNODC, to discuss the current state of play and the appropriate tools for combating money laundering related to fighting illicit trafficking of cultural property. Also, all of these workshops that have been done, you can still find them on our website, and you can still watch the sessions that we had at home if you're interested. And well, lastly, the general public, and I think already Daoud gave some examples of what the Secretariat has been doing. But in the framework of the project, also different activities have been launched. Expert videos have been made, and awareness raising videos, such as the video here under, to sensitize the general public on the issue of illicit trafficking. Also on the website you will find quite some educational resources like the toolkit. And we are now also issuing every 2 months a newsletter for which you can find the previous editions also on the website, and for which you can subscribe if ever you are interested. So that's it for the EU project. If there's any questions, I will be very happy to give you more information.
Now moving forward, we will have Levent as our next panelist. He is an independent researcher focusing on the illicit trafficking of cultural property. And apart from his research, he is also currently working as a project and event assistant specialist at WCAM at Ankara. So Levent, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you very much, Samita, for the introduction. And I hope you can all hear me and see my presentation. Let's start. Sorry. So, oops. Yeah. Hello, everyone, again, and welcome to my presentation. It is very nice to see some familiar faces and some new faces from all around the world, actually, and from many disciplines. For those who wonder the meaning of the fresh carnation flower attached to my lapel here, it is actually my way of celebration, tonight's Hıdrellez, or in other words, a spring celebration, as inscribed on the representative list of the intangible cultural heritage of humanity by North Macedonia and Turkey in 2017. Now, let me start the presentation with some basic information and concepts. Cultural objects, as we are all familiar with, are artistically, historically, and or religiously important items that carry various meanings, either symbolic or economic, to some certain group of people or even peoples. Each conveys a level of knowledge about its creator and time, whether we are aware or not. Which is why it is this profound importance that makes cultural objects desirable to possess by people or groups of people. In relations, they have often been moved from one possession to another possession in either legal ways or illegal ways. This movement is, of course, acceptable in forms of as a form of cultural exchange, and even encouraged by some institutions and by some groups. However, apart from the apart from the illicit trade, the illicit trafficking of cultural objects causes multi-layered challenges for today's world, as it also did in the past. Expectedly, cultural property trade, whether legal or not, is always debated due to the significance of the concerned goods, as we mentioned. When we look at today's global art trade that you can see on the screen, some graphics, distinguishing licit and illicit trafficking is quite challenging due to the complex and ever-changing nature of the market structure. With the current value of over 65.1 billion US dollars in 2021, the art market is unquestionably a global activity, considering the roles of source, transit, and market countries, as well as around 3 million people in the chain to serve the ever-increasing demand of the buyers, let's say. Therefore, this diverse and giant trade needs effective management as well as monitoring to avoid any illegal activities in the process. While there has been continuous damage to cultural property in many forms, there have also been constant protection efforts, as we have seen during this presentation. This counteraction started as individual thoughts in the beginning, and then became a collective responsibility for today's society despite ongoing unlawful activities. As you are familiar with, and as explained clearly before by the previous speakers at this event, initially the 1954 Hague Convention and then its first protocol for wartime protection, and later 1970 Convention for peacetime protection and redemption issues were formed. Further, the UNIDROIT 1995 Convention came into force to supplement the early 1970 Convention, which is our main focus tonight. In the meantime, several other, of course, preventive measures are also taken, such as guidelines, regulations, and other measures. In this framework, the concepts of goodwill and consistency in cultural heritage should be discussed in more details, in line with the already agreed definition of due diligence of the 1995 UNIDROIT Convention. As well as the ICOM Code of Ethics that is on the next slide. Sorry. As you can see on the current screen, that although it may still sound a vague definition when we consider the complexity of either the licit or illicit trade of cultural objects, this could be a concrete evidence for those who desperately need an official source to be fair in the mentioned trade. In short, both articles suggest that if all parties act responsibly and adopt necessary ethical practices, the risk of the illicit transnational flow of cultural property can be minimized. In both forms of the trade, the general discourse is that the value chain starts with the buyer, who causes the demand, of course. Basically, if there is no demand, there is no need for supply. However, against the illicit market for cultural property arises from the cooperation of the states, as they are the key decision makers in this issue. Yet even in a world where an all-comprehensive legislation exists, if the state parties, or if the parties, let's say, don't act with goodwill in a consistent manner, the repatriation process of the artifacts can still remain arduous. Let me explain the situation with a recent example, which I call one of the best practices among several other suitable return cases that we are seeing on the screen right now, or any other that we are observing every day. This case is the return case of return of ancient mosaics from the Bowling Green State University, or in short BGSU, in the USA to its homeland, Turkey. Here I must add that the information that I'm going to convey is initially gathered for a shared article to be published soon of me and my dear colleague, PhD candidate İpek Bayraktar, who is also among us right now tonight. 12 pieces of mosaics, long believed to have originated in the ancient city of Antioch, present-day Antakya, Turkey, were acquired by the mentioned university in 1960s from a New York-based art dealer, without conducting a sufficient provenance research, of course. For nearly 50 years, the mosaics were exhibited in a good condition at the university. Yet with the growing interest and the importance of provenance research, in 2012, the two university professors from the United States suggested that these mosaics are not actually originating from Antioch, but instead were from another ancient city in Turkey, which is called Zeugma. The mosaics are believed to have been illegally excavated and displaced by smugglers during the early 1960s from the archaeological site of Zeugma in today's Gaziantep, Turkey. For this reason, the university in the US contacted the Turkish authorities to start an investigation on the accusation and provenance of the objects. As a result of the mutual work, the university and Turkey reached an agreement in May 2018 for the repatriation of the mosaics. In return for the university authorities' goodwill, Turkey proposed to provide high-quality replicas of the 12 mosaics, which are to be crafted by the local artisans with vernacular materials, again, available in the same region as the originals. Following the agreement, in November 2018, the mosaics were transferred to Turkey to be permanently exhibited in their homeland. Later in December 2018, 12 mosaics panels were introduced to the public at the newly restored Zeugma Mosaic Museums. Nowadays, with the publicity from the repatriated mosaic panels and the rising interest of people, the museum is welcoming actually a higher number of visitors each year than the previous one. The transfer of the facsimile mosaics to the university back in the US was initially pending due to the COVID-19 outbreak, then later concluded in 2021. So here in this successful example of Zeugma mosaics, we should underline three main points in order to understand the multi-layered and ever-changing condition of repatriation cases. First, the goodwill of both returning and receiving parties. Secondly, scholarly research conducted by professors from both sides. Thirdly, the efforts of the source country in the preservation and exhibition of the concerning cultural property. It is evident that neither the university in the US nor Turkey tried to hamper the process, as both aimed the idea of protection of every artifact where created or where it belongs. In addition to the academic study, the collaboration on several occasions expressed by the university members of the American university. Thus, considering the ideas and acts of the university together with the university staff, has a consistent collection policy based on the goodwill and mutual work, which resulted in having a win-win situation for both parties involved. Providing replicas as a gesture of goodwill may look like a minor point to be underlined, yet it actually provides an alternative way to conclude a return claim, as both parties benefited from the return. So, although providing replicas is not a recent phenomenon, let's see another recent instance from another country. In 2018, during the case of Broken Hill Skull between the UK and the Republic of Zambia, the UK also proposed to provide replicas to Zambia, yet Zambia did not accept the offer and demanded the full return or repatriation, let's say, of the concerned property. Thus, perhaps the UK could consider keeping the replicas instead of the original one and returning the original to the requesting party or homeland or its homeland, which has happened in the case of our example of Zeugma mosaics. Additionally, establishing a new distinct museum or a section in a museum has a direct influence on return case, as seen in the case of Zeugma mosaics. According to the university president, being able to exhibit the Zeugma mosaics in a world-renowned Zeugma mosaic museum was a key factor in their decision to return artifacts. In the end, the return of the mosaics is an emblematic case for both parties, as it highlights the importance of collaboration and responsible collecting, as well as the convenience of alternative methods of repatriation that do not consume much time and financial resources of parties involved. As you can also deduce that this is also one of the strong components of being consistent in terms of the holistic approach to fight against illicit trafficking, or in other words, the protection of the cultural property in general. So, in the end, repatriation of antiquities is a complex and exhaustive issue that can be quite expensive for both parties involved. Moreover, it can take a long time to resolve a dispute, of course. Therefore, mutual cooperation, goodwill, and consistent manners play a fundamental role to eliminate illicit items from the art market and prevent practical, legal, and ethical problems to occur while cultivating good relations between institutions, states, and even peoples. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Levent. It was a very interesting presentation. And I'm sure that people are going to have lots of questions to ask you. Now, moving on to our last panelist for tonight, Hamilton has a master's degree in law and development, and he's an expert in public law. He has also authored books such as Money Laundering and Artwork, A New Perspective from Criminality, and Corruption and Money Laundering, The Brazil and Italy Connection. So let's hear it from him. Hamilton, you have the floor.
So hello everyone, good afternoon from Brazil. Here we are in the afternoon. I'm here to talk a little bit about our overview and our experience in Brazil. We had many cases in the last decade with some operations like the car wash operation, for example, an operation that had the space in the media on the last years, and we are in the year of elections too, so people are talking about a lot about the car wash operation. But what I am here to talk about, and I start with a question to our audience, is if you had a lot of money and criminal money, what would be your choice to buy a car, an artwork, or I don't know, a house, a farm, a a beach house, what would be your preference? You could write here in the chat if you would buy a house, a car, or some different products. What we saw here in Brazil in the beginning of the last decade, a castle, yeah, is a good choice. What we saw here in Brazil in the beginning of the last decade was criminals looking for the artwork as a way to lauden or cover the illicit origin of their product. So they start to look for the artwork as a way to cover their illicit product, and in some years have good money to spend and be on the margin of the law. But we have some good and big cases to make as examples here. We had here in São Paulo the case of the Santos Bank with Edmar Cid Ferreira. He had the biggest gallery in the Latin America, and all of the products, all of the artworks were from illicit product with the money of the clients of this bank. And after some years, he was guilty with all, I think, 20 years of guilty in prison. But nowadays here in Brazil, we are living kind of the system of criminality is trying to make things as they used to be, and now the criminals are in the streets again. We are living this problem here in Brazil. I don't know if you can see this on the media, in the international media, but for example, our politicians are approving some laws that make the money laundering and the illicit trafficking of artwork easier here in Brazil. And I think it's a very bad answer to the international community. But we had other cases here in Brazil. We had the case of the Sky Farm. Here in Brazil, in Portuguese, we say Chácara do Céu, but in English, the tradition is Sky Farm, where some criminals theft many artwork from this museum in Rio de Janeiro. And what happened after this theft was just the police officer said, "Oh, look at the streets and the airports. They stole a Picasso, a Monet, and another kind of painting." And they didn't know what this means. They didn't know what a Picasso and a Monet means. And it shows to us that our police didn't have the training to know what they want to do if they have this kind of case. After some years, we saw this case, and they didn't found what happened with this artwork. More than 10 million of reais were stolen, and they didn't know what happened. After some years, we had here in Brazil the car wash operation, and they took a lot of criminals, the politicians and public agents, buying some artwork as a way of money laundering. And what are the answers that Brazil gave to our society and the international society? Was some laws, but general laws. Like, for example, we have a law for 1965 where they talk you cannot take some artwork from the colonial epoch to outside Brazil, but if you have the possibility of talk with a museum from outside, you can give it from outside. But this kind of law that doesn't make any sense to anyone. For example, here in Brazil, we have in the anti-money laundering law, the possibility of due diligence for art dealers and galleries, but they don't have this strictness. So you have the law, but you don't have effectiveness in practice. What we are looking in Brazil is, okay, we have the rule of law, but laws that are not so effective, as we see in other countries like European Union, for example. And what we want to make clear from people is, okay, we need some laws. It's very important, have rigid laws, strict laws. But on the other hand, we want to start with education. Education is the key to make people looking for artwork, not only as free time activity, but it's the store of the nation. With artwork, you can start to have the notions about the culture, and you can know more about the history of your nation. We had here in Brazil some federal judges and now politicians that started to talk about how important it is when you see an artwork that were debt or used as a way to money laundering, returning to people. For example, the ex-Ministry of Justice, Sérgio Moro, and the federal judge, Fausto de Santos, they talked a lot about this. When you see an artwork that were used as a way, a painting or sculpture, used as a way to launder the money, when it comes back to people, it needs to be in the museums. And they started talking about this in the 2010s, in the beginning of this decade, and now we are looking how important it is what they found. In São Paulo, for example, the city where I'm living nowadays, we have many sculptures and paintings in the public streets, remembering people that these paintings or these sculptures were in the criminal hands, but now they came back to people because they belong to people. They don't belong to these criminal activities. So I think our perspective of criminality, Brazil is in a very difficult moment, but on the other hand, we are looking for some pressure from international society to make Brazil start to look for this due diligence practice, compliance practice. We are since the car wash operation, we started to talk a lot about these due diligences in many areas, including artwork. We started to talk here in Brazil about due diligence in cryptocurrencies too. They started to use cryptocurrencies as a way to buy some artwork and using this way as a way to money laundering, because the art market has some peculiarities. Like, for example, you have the secrets as the key of the relation, and sometimes you don't know who buys and who sells the art. But we are starting to look here in Brazil to the obligation of, if you have a red flag or if you see anything that is a little bit different than the normal, you immediately give this information to the unit of intelligence. In Brazil, this unit is the COAF, and after this, they give these informations to the public minister, and you can have the criminal action, the criminal process. But on the other hand, we are looking for many movements from our politicians in Congress to approve some laws that make it difficult. For example, recently they approved a law where the public agents that committed some crimes, administrative crimes, for example, they simply are not being punished anymore. They passed a lot of years during the process, and after some years, the result of these difficulties is they only have this process ending and things are like they used to be. But I hope that people are looking for this new perspective of artwork and how important reinforce these tools are. And I think in some years, Brazil will start to be looked in the international society as a country that try to preserve artwork, and it's not more like a paradise where criminals can come and commit this kind of activity, this criminal activity, and we can be in this UNESCO and international conference as an example of country that make the rule of law effective, not only in theory. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hamilton. Your presentation, especially without the PPT and with a narrative format, was very interesting, and it gave it a personal touch. So now moving on from your talk, now we will start asking each panelist a follow-up question based on their presentation, and then open the floor for questions from audience. And we can already see so many questions from audience. So it would help if panelists could speak in a short way when I ask them questions to save the time for the audience questions. So first, I would like to start with Daud. In your presentation, you talked about creating awareness among people and talked about creating capacity building initiatives. But considering this is the year of youth, what are your thoughts on creating awareness among the youth to fight this illicit trafficking?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think it's actually, there were already some time I was thinking about it, and since it's really from a personal perspective, I would like to, I mean, it's not necessarily something that that I could say in UNESCO's name, but I think that a good way would be to to work with the computer game industry. I just made actually one slide, but I like presentations. Here we go, share. For instance, in the past, you had the ICRC that worked with or that started to work with the computer game industry, and in particular companies like EA, Ubisoft, Activision, etc. For instance, I'm really particularly thinking of, for instance, imagine you have Call of Duty, a game like this, and you have a mission or something that is really creating this link between illicit trafficking and financing of terrorism. It could be done. I mean, it is just like, it would be this sort of link that you see here in the picture, where you have the law of war that was sort of included into a game, where you would be put into the situation of what war really looks like. Since, I mean, it's many people play these games, so you can't. It's not the idea to prevent from playing these games, but it's an idea to include awareness raising within this within these sort of games, and I think it could be interesting. And particularly an organization like UNESCO, like an international organization, could work with these game industry companies that would probably also want to show themselves of working with the UN. So this is something I would definitely want to pitch with my hierarchy when I have the time. But yeah, I guess from our side, this could be a way.
Yeah, actually, this is a very interesting way that you showed, and actually, it would help children from the very young age to be aware of things without even getting to know very difficult terminologies
Yes,
and
absolutely.
difficult concepts.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's just, yeah, absolutely. I think there was this example, just one sentence. There was this example where in a game, when you would shoot at a civilian, or in particular at children, you would have a black screen, and you would see the Geneva Convention article that says that it's a war crime. So this is the sort of awareness raising that I think would really, with interactive learning, that I was thinking of.
Wow, thank you so much for this insight.
Yeah.
Now moving on to Romana, I saw that you have a very mixed background with law and cultural heritage management, and so with context to your both academic and professional experience, what are your thoughts on cross-sectoral and multidisciplinary approach towards handling this problem that we see in Europe?
So I think, as it already reflected through my presentation, I think it is key And I think it can be stimulated in different ways and also implemented in different levels. But it's true that even if I'm completely agreeing with Hamilton on the fact that law is sometimes not enough, it's true that law sometimes international law can stimulate these kind of cooperation. For example, the 1970 convention that requires state parties to set up national services and also encourages to create, for example, specialized police forces and customs officials and prosecutors. Well, this requires training and a constant cooperation also with the relevant authorities and different branches of the government. So this also stimulates some kind of cross-sectoral cooperation. And for example, also the EU legislation that, for example, the anti-money laundering package, you can really see how also this makes it even more important for example, the art market, the financial sector, and public authorities to work together and, for example, to share information on particular risks of money laundering related to a specific type of object or a type of client. And also the import regulation of the EU, which sets very firm prohibitions for illicitly trafficked cultural property to enter a European Union country. And also for this, it is very important that custom officials and police work together with experts from museums and academia and the art market to check the provenance when they have doubts on a certain object. So I think there's quite many good practices, and many countries are actually already working on this subject. For example, the Netherlands, they work very closely with the art market and with the Ministry of Culture and the police and everything. So I think it's very nice to get ideas from others, and it can be, of course, done on an public or international level, but also what we are doing now among us, exchanging perspectives. We all come from different backgrounds, so it's always very, very important to get new ideas and to get out of our little bubble of lawyers or cultural heritage experts, but to exchange. So yeah, that's my view on it.
Thank you so much. Now my next question is for Levent. Considering you have a very strong background in research and academia, what are your thoughts on what do we need to explore more in terms of topics and aspects that would help us achieve the desired outcome to stop at least the escalation of the illicit trafficking?
Thank you for the question, Samita. Actually, in my opinion, people who want to research on this topic, like me or like any other person here, should also consider the interstate relations, cultural bonds, or like cultural connections, let's say, between concerning parties, and the general history between the two or more states, if necessary, for the concerned case. Because each case is very unique in its own sense, and again, because returning and not returning an object is unfortunately or fortunately, depends on your perspective, mostly political. Besides, it is also important to look at a broader perspective or broader picture of either return claims or concluded ones, being critical, let's say, or be skeptical even. For example, there have been numerous efforts to decolonize museums, as there are also some questions about it as far as I have seen. Decolonize museums around the world. It's a real trend among museums to use the word decolonization, but what about the stolen or illicitly trafficked objects from non-colonized countries, which are also at those museums, by the way? Like side by side sometimes. It is interesting to notice that non-colonized countries like Greece, Italy, Turkey, Iran, whatever, that are already accepted as source countries in many like occasions. So in order to act in every possible, in order to act in goodwill or be consistent in these matters, as I have mentioned in the presentations, we researchers should not avoid considering the every possible aspects of the issue. Since this fight against illicit activities needs to be holistic rather than focusing on one aspect or ignoring the others. So in other words, it is not enough to follow or even creating a trend as happening in decolonization, for example.
Yeah, I think the holistic point of view is a very key concept when it comes to researching on concepts like these. And you made a very good point on how we can learn from other things and from countries which are not even colonized. And so based on this, as well as the both previous questions, what I would like to ask Hamilton now is that based on his legal expertise and his books, has he come across any examples of recent strategies adopted in countries apart from European Union, which could be useful for European context? Hamilton, you are on mute.
Sorry. Well, I think a model that made some good results in Brazil was the task force model, where you have many different areas from public sector working together. So you make information faster than if you need to give some informations and wait for this answer. If you have this immediate contact, it would be good. Another point that we are starting here in Brazil is make civil society working as a partner of the state. If you have this work together, you make things easier. Like, for example, you don't make any recommendation only in the theory. You make these recommendations effectiveness in the practical way, in the practical aspect. Because here in Brazil, we live with many laws where they are recommendations, but they want to start to be obligations. Like, for example, the due diligence for art dealers. We are living in recommendations. So if it is a recommendation, the person will accept or not. Okay, but if it starts to be an obligation, the person must follow what the law is demanding. So I think starting to have this kind of holistic view, as they said before me, is very important. And I think once again we need to start looking for education. Education is the basis of make people more skeptical, thinking more when they will buy an artwork and they didn't receive the recipe of this artwork, and trying to be more have more informations about the person who is selling the artwork to. So if we start to make people more conscious about their laws and how important it is preserve this market, I think it will make a more strong market.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the community-based approach and the education, importance on education could be a way forward in fighting this fight. So now I think we can have some questions from the audience. Just before that, we do have some announcements to make. So Europa Nostra and its partner organizations such as ESACH are launching a wide consultation on youth for future of cultural heritage in Europe as a contribution towards the European Year of Youth. And this consultation is made via a 10-minute online anonymous survey that can help them compile a profile of young people interested in cultural heritage. So we request you to please take this short survey whenever you have free time. The links are available on their websites, as well as I think Lydia will share the link for the survey in the chat. So please take a look at that. The second announcement that we have is regarding our next ESACH Talks, which is going to happen on 18th of May, and it's going to be in partnership with Europeana. We will be exploring the digital transformation of the cultural heritage sector, and you can find all the details on our website and all our social media handles. Apart from that, last but not the least, we have released the ESACH Quarterly, the link to which, again, Lydia will be putting in the chat. And again, you can find all the details on the quarterly itself on the website as well. It is filled with many interesting articles. So we hope that you get to learn new things and new perspectives from it. Now, I wish to give the floor to the audience. I think first we can take some questions from the chat itself, and then if you want to have a follow-up question, then we can get them from just the participation directly. I think many of the questions were answered in the chat itself, but if you have any follow-up questions to that, or if Romana and Daud have any follow-up things to say to those questions, then it would be useful. There is one question that I'm seeing here. Let me just read it out from my phone. So this question is from Carlota. So she says that you probably already saw this, but so this is the question regarding 1970 convention, which only applies to the inventoried items. And does it mean that the countries with less resources to carry out inventories and excavation are less covered by this instrument? And how is this gap addressed by national law? So maybe Daud or Romana could like to answer the question.
Yeah, so I think so. Daud is not here anymore, unfortunately, but and I think he already partly also responded in the chat. But so different things are done, and it's true that this is a very difficult subject. And one of the things that is being implemented is a model law for countries to sort of all of the undiscovered archaeological heritage that also is already part of their cultural heritage. That means that even undiscovered heritage, when it is exported to another country, it is also illegal. So this is a very important legal tool that countries can implement to protect their archaeological heritage. But it is true that for when it comes to evidence, it is still very, very important that countries identify what their cultural heritage is and to inventory, so that later on, if it gets stolen or trafficked, that it is easier to identify it and prove also that it is your country's cultural heritage. So it's a very difficult question, and it's true that UNESCO tries to accompany countries that have, for example, very rich archaeological heritage, but not a lot of resources always to inventory all of it. But thank you very much for this question, because it's true that it's a subject that the Secretariat is working on a lot.
Yeah, we also had follow-up questions by Divya, and then again follow-up question to that again from Carlota, which was related to the colonialism and 1970 convention, but I think it was covered in the chat itself. I myself have a small question for Levent. I asked, who are the decision makers when there is a conflict between the organizations or countries, and who is approached, as in which are the experts that are approached to solve the conflict?
Yeah, very good question indeed. But as you might have guessed, there is no answer. There is no one answer, at least, to this, because each case is unique in its own way. So it really depends on the actors involved. So if there are two countries that are centralized, so that have centralized governments, for example, Turkey, or for example, let's say Russia, or maybe I'm wrong by saying Russia right now, because if it is not a centralized government, I'm not sure about that. But let's say only let's give an example of not uncentralized governments, not centralized government like the US or Switzerland, for example. You should be directly in communication with the institution through official channels, of course. But if it is a centralized government, you should be dealing with the departments, related departments at the related ministries, mostly like Ministry of Culture or Tourism, or sometimes Internal Affairs, whatever. There is also ICP, RCP, as mentioned in the chat, but this committee is mostly an advisory body, so the decision, it is not a decision maker, so you cannot, like, let's say, adopt a resolution at that committee, because it is a kind of an advisory body, or you can call it a platform, basically, to issues, for issues to be raised. So yeah, so it really depends on the actors involved in the case.
We have two more questions which are interrelated. One is from Yana and the second one is from Daud himself. They wanted to know if there is going to be any documentation or maybe a policy document, something like that, from UNESCO on digital heritage. And Yana was, if I'm not wrong, asking about, just give me a minute. So, Daud was asking about any examples of illicit trafficking of digital heritage. So we have two questions related to digital heritage and copyright related to it. Maybe Romana would like to take this.
Yeah, I think the difficulty is that when it comes to digital heritage, we are actually not really talking about the 1970 convention. We are really talking about copyright law. But when it comes to the illicit trafficking of cultural property, I think digital inventories, for example, are a very important topic. So, for example, also in relation to restitution, there's also quite some cultural institutions and museums that make inventories of their collections, make it digital, so that communities or other countries can actually identify which cultural property they would like to make a restitution claim for. So this is the digital part of what I think is very much linked to what we are doing. But I think when it comes to, for example, I saw in the chat an NFT screenshot. This is copyright law, and I think the difficulty of these kind of things is that law is evolving less rapidly as the digital world at the moment. So I have to say I'm not completely up to speed on how it is now with NFTs and this kind of illegal activities, but I don't feel completely comfortable with replying on this.
Just for clarification, what we talked about was related to the tangible cultural properties and not the digital heritage related.
Yes.
And that is why it could cause some confusion, because it is a very mixed, like shaded thing to enter. That is why it would be difficult. Now I think we can open the floor to the questions. If you want to raise hands and directly ask the questions to the participants. Otherwise, I think we would be done with the question and answer round. So participants, if you have any questions, I could see one. Carlota?
Thank you. I do have, and it's kind of related to this last topic of digital technologies that we were talking, that I was wondering, in 1970, when they were talking about due diligence, it was really a completely different thing than now that we have access to the internet. How has this changed also the practice of and the responsibilities of consumers, of the art market, and what is the future going on from here?
Well, this is a very up-to-date question indeed. I think what now the due diligence requirements were priorly more focused on professionals. So we asked a certain degree of due diligence from art market professionals. But now actually we are all part of we are all actually buying art, and in a way we should all practice due diligence. So I think it's a sort of the general public has to be sensitized on the fact that there is a problem, and that it is illegal to buy certain types of art, and that we all have a responsibility to check certain kind of things and to check the identity of the person that is selling, and to check the provenance of goods. And I think it's a shared, where we all have responsibility, that there has to be legal tools, there has to be education, and that is maybe more of a responsibility that public authorities have, and even us as UNESCO, it is something that we do. I think also the online platforms should be aware of the fact that actually that there's illegal activities coming from what they are selling. So that's also one of the reasons that UNESCO is more and more collaborating with online platforms. But yeah, well, as I said, I think it's a shared responsibility. So.
Yeah, actually, this would answer the question by Yana when she was talking about how the 1970 convention can help towards a document which would be covering the digital heritage. So it will be like a collaborative effort of UNESCO and other stakeholders, if I'm not wrong. Okay, then if we don't have any other questions, I think we can conclude this question and answer session. I would like to again thank all our panelists for making this event possible and for sharing their experiences with all of us. I hope you enjoyed the event, and we look forward to seeing you all again in our next talk. I wish you all the best and have a good night. Thank you.